You are no longer permitted to use this water, and effective today, your access is revoked. That was Gail Tarot, standing on my own gravel in white kitten heels, reading off a clipboard like she was handing down a verdict. She did not look up when she said it. She had a little laminated badge clipped to a magenta blazer and a folder under her arm with a gold sticker on the front, and behind her, the morning fog was just lifting off the water I had swum in since I was 6 years old. What she did not know, standing there telling me I could not touch my own lake, was that the only way she or any of her 200 neighbors reached that water ran across a strip of ground that had my family's name on the deed, and nobody else's. Not an easement, not a shared drive. A road I owned outright, fee simple, the way you own the shirt on your back. She had revoked my access to the lake. I owned the only road in. I am going to tell you how that ended, because the ending is the whole point, and I want you sitting with the same fact. She refused to check for 11 months. First, let me lay the ground the way I would lay it for a client who hired me to find the truth under their feet. My name is Noreen Vance. I am 58 years old, and I've been a licensed land surveyor for 31 of those years. I run benchmarks and turn angles and read the iron my grandfather drove into the ground before I was born. I own 91 acres along the north shoulder of a glacial lake in the mountains, with a cabin my mother was born in, and a gravel lane 4/10 of a mile long that crosses my pasture and dead ends at the water. That lane is the only land route to the lake. Everything else is cliff, bog, or the next county. Here is the question I want you to hold while I tell this. If someone stood on ground you had paid taxes on for 3 generations and told you that you were trespassing on it, and they had the nerve to do it from the middle of your own driveway, what would you have done? I want you to really sit with that, because the easy answer is the loud one, and the loud one loses. I did not raise my voice that first morning. I had Scout at my heel, my blue heeler, gray and rust with one ear that never stood upright, and I had a coffee mug going cold in my hand. I let her finish reading. Then I asked her one question. I asked her who told her she had authority over my land. She blinked at me like I had spoken a foreign language, and she said the words I would hear from her in nearly every form for the next year. She said, "The community has standards, and that lake is a community amenity." Then she got into a white sport utility, the size of a small barn, and drove back up my own gravel to the subdivision the developer had bolted onto the slope above me. I need to back up to how those houses got there, because that is the engine of this whole thing, and it explains why a woman who had lived near me for 6 years thought she could revoke my birthright with a laminated card. When I was a girl, there was nothing above my pasture but timber and a logging 2-track. My grandfather had bought the original homestead in pieces over the 1940s and 50s, and the lake shore came with it. The deed described the road by meets and bounds as a private lane reserved to the homestead parcel. He drove the corners himself. He was a surveyor before me, and his father kept bees on the same hill, and the family did not part with land. We held it. Then, about 9 years back, a development company bought the timber tract on the hill. They called it a Lakeview community, which was a generous use of the word, because, for most of those lots, you could see a wedge of blue between 2 pines if you stood on a stepladder. The brochure promised lake access. The brochure did not promise a legal right to it because there was none to promise, but nobody up the hill read deeds. They read brochures. They bought the wedge of blue and the promise, and they started walking down my lane to the water, like it was a public park. For the first few years, I let it ride. That is the part I want you to understand about me before the rest. I am not a fence builder by temperament, People walked down, they fished, they let their kids swim, they waved, and I waved back. My late husband, Carl, used to say a lake is better when somebody's enjoying it. And he was usually right about things like that. He passed 4 winters ago, a heart thing, fast, and I will not dress it up. After he was gone, I kept the lane open, partly because closing it would have felt like closing a door he had always wanted open. So the use was there. I let it happen. Remember that, because it becomes the whole legal fight later, and the person who used my own kindness against me did not understand what kind of weapon she thought she had picked up. The trouble started this spring. The development changed hands. The original builder sold his unsold lots and the half-built clubhouse to a management outfit, and that outfit installed a homeowners association with real teeth, dues, and fines, and a board, and the board elected a president. Gail Taro had moved up to the new houses from somewhere flat and warm into the biggest of the spec houses, and she ran for president on a platform of, and I am quoting the flyer her own people later handed me, expanding. The word was right there in April, and I should have read it for what it was. The first letter came in May. It was on association letterhead, and it informed me that the board had voted to designate the lakefront as a community common area, and that I would be expected to maintain the access lane to association standards or face assessment. I read it twice. Then I did the thing I do. The thing 31 years of the trade built into me. I pulled my own file. I want to be plain about what was in that file, because it is the spine of everything. I had the original deed, recorded in 1948, describing the road as a private lane appurtenant to the homestead and reserved to it. I had the subdivision plat from when those houses were built, the actual recorded map. And on that map, the developer's engineer had drawn the lots, the internal streets, and a little dashed line where my lane was, labeled in the engineer's own hand, existing private drive not dedicated. Not dedicated. Those 2 words meant the developer had never been granted a right to use my road, had known it, and had recorded a map saying so. I had the title commitment from when I refinanced the cabin, which listed no easement, burdening my road in favor of the houses above, and I had something better than all of it. I had 31 years of knowing exactly what those documents meant. I wrote the board a short letter back. I said the lane was private property in fee, that no easement of access existed of record in favor of the subdivision, that the recorded plat itself labeled the lane as not dedicated, and that they were welcome to verify all of it at the county recorder's office for a few dollars in copy fees. I was polite. I even offered to keep allowing neighborly foot traffic to the water as I always had. As a courtesy, not a right, I mailed it certified and kept the green card. That is the part that still sits with me. I handed her the answer in May. I told her exactly where to look and exactly what she would find. She did not go look. In all the long months that followed, she never once pulled the deed. I told her to pull, never spent the $3 it would have cost to learn she was wrong. She decided the answer instead, and then she spent the better part of a year building a structure on top of an answer that was not true. That is the kind of person this was. Not stupid. Stubborn in a particular expensive way. The way of a person who has told a crowd a thing and would rather the world be wrong than be the one who told them wrong. The second letter came in June, on a Wednesday, and it had teeth. It assessed me $400 for failure to maintain the common access lane and gave me 30 days to cure. There was a number on it, a fine, and that number is where I started a folder of my own, not a binder for show. A working file, the kind I keep for any boundary dispute, with every paper dated and every conversation logged. In my own hand, the hour it happened, I drove up the hill to the clubhouse on a Thursday evening to put it to rest in person. I am not built for letters when a face will do. The board met in the half-finished clubhouse. Drywall dust still on the baseboards, folding chairs, scraping on bare concrete, a card table with a gavel somebody had clearly bought online, and a banner taped crooked to the studs that read, in cheerful letters, "Building our community together." Gail sat at the head of it in a coral blazer with the badge, and there were 5 other people, and one of them, a quiet woman named Marie with a steno pad, sat off to the side taking minutes in a small, careful hand. I came in my work clothes, straight from a job, dust on my boots, and I felt every eye in the room measure me against the spec houses they had bought. And decide I was the problem, I asked to be heard. Gail let me stand for exactly 2 minutes by the clock on the wall. I did not bring the whole file. I brought one copy of the recorded plat, folded once, and I set it on the card table and started to explain what the engineer's own label on my lane meant, and I got about 3 sentences in before she lifted a hand, the way you would stop a dog, and she did not even look at the page. "We have had our own professional look into this," she said, "and our easement is well established by decades of continuous use." Decades of use. She thought my own kindness was her deed. I asked her evenly who the professional was and whether they had pulled the deed. She told me that was not my concern. I asked whether anyone on the board had been to the recorder's office and read the chain of title. A man 2 chairs down opened his mouth, then looked at Gail and closed it. Nobody had. I left the folded plat on the table when I went, in case one of them grew curious. Marie told me later it sat there 3 weeks and got used as a coaster, and then it disappeared, and she always wondered if Gail had thrown it out so the others would not read it. I think she did. I think she could not afford for them to read it any more than she could afford to read it herself. I went home, and I did not sleep much, and the next morning I made a decision I want to be honest about, because it is the hinge of the whole story. I decided to stop being neighborly and start being a surveyor. Those are different jobs. The neighbor keeps the lane open. The surveyor documents the boundary. From that morning, I logged every person who came down my lane, every date, with photographs. Not to be cruel, but because she had just told me out loud that she planned to claim my road by their footprints. If footprints were going to be evidence, I was going to have a record of exactly whose they were and when, and I was going to have my no trespassing posting dated because a prescriptive claim dies the day the true owner objects. The letters I sent went to all 43 households, individually, certified. Each one said the same plain thing. The lane was private. Their use had been by my permission, freely given, and now formally withdrawn as a matter of record, and continued use would be without right. Permissions is the word that kills a prescriptive easement, and I used it on purpose, in writing, dated, to 43 doors. Marie, the secretary, signed for hers, herself. I saw her name on the green card when it came back, and I did not think anything of it. Then you would think a careful person, hearing 43 certified letters land on the same afternoon, would finally go pull the deed. Gail did not. Gail escalated. This is the thing about her I came to understand. She had told the whole development that she was getting them the lake, and she could no longer afford for the lake to not be theirs, because the lie had become her standing. So she did what people do when the ground will not support them. She decided to manufacture better ground. The third escalation came in August, and it was not a letter. It was a man with a tripod. I came over the rise on my own lane one morning, and there was a survey crew set up in my pasture, a young fellow running a total station, and a helper holding a rod down by my shoreline, and a magenta sport utility parked crooked on my gravel with Gail leaning against it. I walked down. I asked the young man what firm he was with and what he was surveying. He told me, and he had no reason to lie, that he was retracing an easement for the association at the client's direction, and that the client had supplied the description. The client. I asked who stamped the work. He said a name, Brandt, a licensed surveyor, 2 counties over, who I knew of and did not respect, a man who would stamp a plat off a description somebody handed him and never drive a corner himself. I told the young man calmly that he was standing on private fee land, with no easement of record, and that I would be writing his firm and the board that licenses us both. He turned a little gray, packed his instrument. The helper went with him. Gail stayed long enough to tell me that the survey would proceed with or without my cooperation, and that I was, her words, obstructing a lawful easement determination. Then she drove off and left 2 flagged stakes in my pasture that I pulled with my own hands and dated and bagged. Here is where it stops being foolishness and starts being something a court has a name for. In September, I got a call from the title company I had used to refinance. A woman, in their office I had known for years, and her voice was careful. She said a document had come across the recorder's daily index that touched my parcel, and she thought I should see it before I heard about it some other way. I drove to the recorder's office that afternoon. Their recorded, indexed, stamped with a real recording number, was an instrument styled as a declaration of easement, describing a 40-foot right-of-way for ingress and egress and recreation across my road and shoreline in favor of the subdivision, signed by Gail Tarot as president of the association and notarized Dot. And attached to it was a survey exhibit bearing the seal of the surveyor named Brandt. They had recorded a road across my land. They had put a false easement into the public record over my own ground, signed and sealed, as if signing a thing makes it true. I sat in my truck in the recorder's parking lot for a long time. I will tell you the truth about what that felt like, because the voice in these stories is always so calm, and I do not want to lie to you. My hands shook, not from fear. From the particular fury of a person who keeps records for a living, watching someone forge a record. That instrument, sitting in the public chain of my title, could cloud my land for as long as it sat there. It could scare a future buyer. It could be waived. At a court, she had reached into the one place I hold sacred, the recorded chain of title, and she had put a lie in it with her name on it. That night, my grandson Theo called from his mother's place across the state, 15 years old, and worried because his cousin in the development had told him the whole neighborhood was saying his grandmother had stolen the lake from the neighborhood. I will not pretend that did not land. There is a particular shame they try to hand you, the people who do this, and it travels. It got all the way to a boy 4 hours away and made him afraid for me. I told him the truth in small words. I told him nobody steals what is already theirs. I told him I had the papers his great-great-grandfather drove into the ground with his own hands, and that the ground does not change its mind because a woman in a nice blazer signed a piece of paper. I told him I was going to handle it the slow, right way, not the loud way. The way I handle a boundary I am paid to settle, and that the slow way wins because it is built on what is actually true. He went quiet, and then he asked if Scout was okay. That is a 15-year-old for you. The whole world is shaking, and he asks about the dog. I told him Scout was lying on my boots and did not believe a word those people were saying. He laughed a little, the worry going out of his voice, and he made me promise to send a picture when it was over of me. At the open gate, I promised. We hung up, and I sat in the dark a long while with my hand on the dog. And somewhere in that dark, I stopped being sad and got very clear about what I was going to do. I did not call a lawyer first. People expect that, and I did get one, but not first. First, I did my own job. A surveyor's answer to a false survey is a true one, and I am better at it than Brant is. And I had a thing he never bothered to find. I had the original monuments. For 3 days, I worked my own ground from the recorded corners out. I dug at the rear boundary corner my grandfather had referenced in the 1948 deed and found his iron pipe, the old galvanized kind with his scribed cap, exactly where the deed said it would be, 18 inches down under 70 years of duff. I found the second monument at the bend in the lane, a stone with a drill hole, and the third at the water. I ran my levels and turned my angles, and I tied the whole thing to the recorded plat. The real one, the one the developer's own engineer had drawn and stamped, with my lane plainly marked as an undedicated private drive. The truth on the ground and the truth on the recorded map agreed with each other and disagreed with Brant by the entire width of a fabricated easement. Brant's exhibit had simply drawn a 40-foot strip where the client wanted one. He had never found a monument because he had never looked for one. You cannot retrace an easement that was never created. You can only draw it, and a drawing is not a deed. I worked those 3 days alone, except for Scout, who followed me corner to corner and lay in the duff while I dug, and I will tell you, it was the calmest I had been since the first letter. There is a thing that happens to a worried mind. When it goes back to a craft it trusts. My hands knew what to do, even when the rest of me was sick over a forged paper in the public record. I cleared that buried corner with a hand trowel rather than a shovel, the way my grandfather taught me. Slow, so you do not move the very thing you are looking for, and when the scribe cap came up, under the trowel edge, with his initials still legible in the old galvanized steel, I sat back on my heels in the dirt and I cried for a minute. And I am not ashamed of it. He had set that pin to last past everyone who would ever doubt it. He had set it for exactly this morning, though he could not have known her name. I sealed my own survey. I am licensed to do that, and I stand behind every line on it, and I recorded it. Then I called the lawyer, a property attorney down in the county seat, plain woman, no theatrics, and I laid the whole file on her desk, dated and ordered. The deed, the plat, the 43 certified permission letters with green cards, the dated photographs of the crew on my land, the pulled stakes in their labeled bag, my recorded retracement survey with the found monuments, and the recorded false easement with Gale's signature and Brant's seal. She read for a long time without saying anything. Then she looked up and said the only words a person in my position wants to hear from counsel. She said, "They wrote it all down for us." She filed 2 things. The first was a quiet title action, which is the slow legal way of asking a court to look at the whole chain and declare, on the record, who owns what, so that the false easement could be stripped out of my title where it sat. The second was a referral, because recording a false instrument against real property with intent to encumber it is not just a civil wrong in our state, it is a crime, and the surveyor's false seal was a matter for the licensing board that could pull Brant's stamp. We were not seeking to destroy anyone. We were seeking to put the record back the way it was before someone forged it, and to let the consequences land where the law already kept them, on the people who signed and sealed the lie. And here is where I made the move, the title of this whole business. Turns on the move I would do again tomorrow. While the slow legal machine ground forward, the homeowners kept walking down my lane like nothing had happened, kept holding their summer parties at my shore, kept treating my fee land as their amenity, because Gale kept telling them the easement was recorded and the lake was theirs and that the surveyor lady was just a bitter old woman who would lose. So I exercised the one right not even Gale disputed. I owned the road. I closed it. I did it correctly, the way a surveyor closes a thing, not the way an angry person does. I had a steel gate fabricated, hung it on 2 posts, set in concrete on my own land at the top of my lane, where it left the county road, well inside my own corner, so there was no question of blocking a public way. I posted it with my name, the recording number of my deed, and the plain words, "Private road." No easement of record. Access by owner's permission only. I gave the county a key for emergency access in writing, because that is what a responsible owner does, and because I wanted the record to show I had. And then, on a Saturday morning in October, I locked it. The development lost its mind. By noon, Gale was at my gate in the magenta blazer with 11 neighbors and the laminated badge, and she was on the phone with the sheriff. And I want you to hear how that call went, because it is the moment the whole year turned. A deputy came out, young, polite, a fellow named Ames, and Gale met him at the gate already talking, telling him I had illegally blocked the community's recorded easement and demanding he order it opened and cite me for it. Ames did the thing she had refused to do for 11 months. He asked to see the easement. She handed him a printout of her recorded declaration. Proud. Certain. The gold sticker and all. He read it. Then he turned to me and asked, in that even way they have, whether I had anything that spoke to it. I handed him a single sheet, not the whole file, 1 sheet. My recorded retracement survey, with the found monuments and the recording number, and clipped to it a copy of the developer's own subdivision plat with my lane marked, in the engineer's own hand, as an undedicated private drive. I said plainly, that road is mine in fee. Her recording is a false instrument, and there's a quiet title action pending on it, and a referral to the district attorney. The county has a key for emergencies. Everyone else is here. By permission, I have withdrawn in writing to every household. Certified. I did not raise my voice. I did not say a word to Gale. I let the paper do it. Deputy Ames stood there in the gravel between us and read both documents twice. Gale kept talking. Faster now, community standards, recorded easement, decades of use. And I watched the deputy's face do the thing I had been waiting 11 months for somebody official to do. He stopped listening to the costume and started reading the document. He looked at her recording. He looked at my plat. He found the notation the developer's surveyor had lettered across my lane and read it to himself, his lips moving slightly, and I watched him understand it. And then he handed her printout back to her and said quietly that this was a civil property matter with an active court case, that he could not and would not order a private locked gate opened on the strength of a recorded instrument that was itself the subject of a fraud referral, as far as the paperwork in his hands showed him private ground. He told her, gently, that if she wanted the gate opened, she would need a court order, and that he would suggest she not record anything else about this parcel until the court ruled. He did not take a side. He read the record, and the record had a side. Gale looked at me then, really looked, for the first time since the morning on my gravel, and I watched something move behind her eyes. The first cold draft of a question she had refused to ask in May. What if the deed says what the old woman says it says? She got in her sport utility, and she did not slam the door, which somehow was worse, and the 11 neighbors drifted back up the hill, and the lane was quiet. And Scout walked out to the middle of my own gravel and lay down in the sun like she had been waiting all year for it to be quiet. It was not over. I want to be careful here because the satisfying part is not the gate. The gate was just me exercising a right nobody could argue with. The real reversal came in the slow rooms the way it does, and it came because she had written it all down. The first crack came from inside her own board, and it came from Marie, the secretary with the steno pad. About 3 weeks after the gate, Marie called me. Her voice was low and a little broken, the way a person sounds when they have been carrying a thing too long. She said she had been taking the minutes the whole time. She said that at the meeting in July, before the false easement was recorded, Gail had told the board in those rooms that she knew her word, knew that the lane was probably not theirs by deed, but that the management company had told her the development could not sell the remaining 19 lots without lake access in the marketing. That lots with access were worth tens of thousands more apiece. And that recording an easement now and fighting about it later was Gail's phrase from the minutes Marie read me over the phone. A calculated cost of doing business. There it was. The whole thing, finally plain. It was never about community standards. It was a land company that could not sell 19 wedges of blue, and a president who had agreed to forge them a right-of-way to move the inventory, and who had dressed the forgery in a magenta blazer and a laminated badge so the neighbors would carry her water down my own road. Marie asked me what she should do, and I told her the truest thing I know. I told her to do exactly what she had done. Write it down, accurately, and give it to the court when it asked, and let the record speak. She did. She turned over her minutes, all of them, the real ones, to my attorney and to the district attorney, and the minutes confirmed in Gail's own recorded words what the survey already proved by iron and stone. Marie did not do it for me. She did it because she had sat in those folding chairs taking down a lie in shorthand for a year and could not carry it anymore. She resigned from the board the same week. I sent her a note. I did not gloat in it. I just thanked her for keeping a good record, because, in my world, there is no higher compliment. The quiet title hearing came in the deep of winter, in the old county courthouse, and the room was fuller than I expected, because by then the neighborhood had split. Some of them had finally walked into the recorder's office and spent the $3 and pulled the plat for themselves and seen the notation across my lane with their own eyes. The same one I had carried into that clubhouse a year before, and they were furious, but not at me anymore. They were furious at the woman who had let them throw certified mail money and dues and a year of bad blood at a right that the recorded map said had never existed. They had bought the wedge of blue. They had not signed up to forge a road for it. I did not give a speech. My lawyer put documents in front of the judge in order, and the documents did the talking, the way I had wanted them to since May, the deed of 1948. The recorded plat with the engineers now dedicated on my lane. The chain of title showing no easement ever granted. My retracement survey, tying the found monuments, my grandfather's scribed iron pipe, and the drilled stone, and the shore monument to the recorded corners, against Brandt's exhibit that tied to nothing because it was drawn, not found. The 43 certified permission letters that dated and delivered foreclosed any prescriptive claim the use might once have grown into. And Marie's minutes, in which the president of the association admitted on the record, before she recorded the false easement, that she knew the lane was likely not theirs. The judge was an old man with reading glasses and no patience for theater, and he asked the association's lawyer exactly one question that ended it. He asked whether the association had a single recorded instrument predating my deed or granted by my family that created an easement across my road. The lawyer, to his credit, did not lie to a judge. He said after a pause that the association relied on prescriptive use and on the recorded declaration. The judge took off his glasses. He said the recorded declaration was a unilateral document the association had signed against land it did not own, which created nothing, and that prescriptive use cannot run against permission, and the owner had documented permission to 43 households. Then, he said, the sentence I had been carrying in my chest since the first letter landed in May, in the flat language of an order. He quieted title in me, free of the claimed easement, and he ordered the false declaration expunged from the record and the survey exhibit struck. He put my road back the way my grandfather left it. Gail was in the second row. She did not have the blazer on that day. She had on a plain gray coat, and the badge was gone. And when the judge spoke, she looked straight ahead at nothing, and I felt no triumph looking at her, which surprised me. I felt the way you feel when a long fever finally breaks. Tired and clear, she had lost the thing she actually wanted, which was never the lake. It was standing. It was the figure she cut up on the hill. The judge had just taken all of it back out of the record and handed it to no one. The consequences after that were not mine to deliver, and I did not want them to be, and that matters. The licensing board suspended Brandt's surveyor's stamp for sealing an exhibit he never set foot on the ground to verify, which is the worst thing a person in my trade can do, and he will not stamp a plat for a long time, if ever again. The district attorney charged Gail under the statute that makes it a crime to record a false instrument against real property, and because Marie's minutes showed she knew the lane was likely not theirs, when she signed and recorded the declaration, it was not a misunderstanding she could plead her way out of. She took a plea, a felony reduced to a misdemeanor, restitution to me for my survey, and legal costs down to the dollar, and a bar from any HOA board in the state. The management company, exposed in the same daylight, quietly dropped the lake access language from its marketing because there was no lake access to sell and never had been, and the 19 unsold lots went on the market priced for what they actually were, which was houses with a thin slice of far-off water visible from the upstairs windows on a clear day. The neighborhood and I made our own peace, slow and partial, the way real things mend. I did not tear the gate down because the gate was never the point, and the road is still mine. That spring, though, I did something Carl would have liked. I drew up a short written license, plain language, signed by me as owner, granting the households in the subdivision permission to cross my lane on foot and use the shoreline for swimming and fishing, revocable, no vehicles, no parties without asking. Permissions, the same word that won me the case, given back now as a gift instead of taken as a right. Most of them signed it. A few were too embarrassed to, and that is all right. The difference between this spring and last is one word, and the word is the whole thing. They come down by permission, now, written and dated, and they know it, and so do I. I want to step out of the story for a moment and tell you the lesson plainly, because it is the reason I told you any of this. Walk your boundaries. Find your corners. Pull your own deed and read it with your own eyes. And if you do not understand it, pay a surveyor or a title officer the small money it costs to tell you the truth about the ground you stand on before someone with a clipboard and a costume decides the truth for you. A recorded document, older and cleaner than the claim against it, will outlast any badge, any blazer, any decades of use that was really just somebody's kindness. And when you give that kindness, give it as permission. In writing, dated, so it stays a gift and never hardens into someone else's right. Gail Taro thought a thing was true because she had signed it. The ground does not care what you signed. It cares what you can prove. Keep the kind of records that can prove it. Scout is at my boots right now, the bad ear flat, and the lake is going gold the way it does in the evening. And the gate at the top of my lane stands open today. Because I chose to open it, which is the only kind of open that ever meant anything. Sect. My grandfather drove an iron pipe into this ground 70 years ago, inscribed his cap and walked away, trusting that the record would hold. It held. That is the whole story, and it is the only thing I ever needed it to do. If this sat well with you, leave a word below about your own piece of ground and how you keep its corners, and stay close, because the next one I want to tell you is about a man who got a demolition notice for a barn his family raised by hand from a board that never once checked who actually owned the field it stood in. That is a story for another evening. Mind your corners until then.